I've seen some work by Breakthrough in the past, and they're really good at taking these big problems like gender equality or gender difference and changing our mindsets about that, and giving us practical ways to work through that, everyday ways, because I think in this Me Too moment, a lot of times we're like, this is terrible, but what can I do? So this is what we hope will happen here, and I'm so glad that we have Mary Lannone, is that right? Lannone, okay, it's close. And Urvashi, who's from the Indian side of Breakthrough, because they have an Indian wing and a US wing that obviously work together since they're both here. So welcome, please give them a big round of applause. And maybe you guys can start by talking about your work a little bit, and then I'm going to try and get you logged in.
Okay, so we just want to start by introducing ourselves to you, introducing Breakthrough to you. Breakthrough is a global human rights organization working out of the US and India, and our mission is to make gender-based violence unacceptable. And we do that through a culture change lens. Our motto is human rights start with you, and that every single individual on this planet can take small daily actions to change the culture in your individual communities, on your campuses, in your ecosystems, to make a world where nobody else has to say me too. And Urvashi, if maybe you can give a little bit of background in the office as well.
So Breakthrough actually started its work from India, and we were set up in 1999, 2000, almost 18 years back. And our initial stage was actually using popular culture, music videos to talk about a very difficult issue, domestic violence. Who would want to hear about domestic violence in a music video, right? So that's how the challenge began, actually putting out public dialogue on very stigmatized, taboo topics, especially related to violence against women and girls, into the public space, into the regular conversations where people who are not the converted can have a discussion. And not by confronting them, but it's more of, showing them a video in a non-threatening way, talking to them on, does that happen around you? Do you see it? What would you do if this happens to somebody who's close to you? So these were some of the things that we began with. Currently, we're doing programming around domestic violence, sexual harassment in public and workspace. We talk about gender-based sex selection. In simple terms, that basically means female feticide in our country, because we have a skewed sex ratio in certain spaces where sons are preferred and girls aren't. And then we talk about early marriage, where girls get married before the age of 18. So these are again difficult topics to talk about in communities where we work. And we have a huge work around adolescent empowerment as well, wherein we engage almost 400,000 adolescents from the age group of 12 to 14 on these issues of gender-based discrimination, which is very common because, like you guys, a lot of adolescents are not so privileged. We have to struggle in our country from as basic thing as education, nutrition, health, career choices, life choices, whom to marry, when to marry, whether we will have a partner of our choice or not. These are even greater questions that we need to answer in our own context. So our contexts are very different. And there are challenges not within just the family, it's also the community and the education system where we work and everywhere else. So it's interesting because there is a moment for us right now to shift the tide, and that's what we're all pushing for. So back to Mary.
Before we really get into the thick of everything, I do just want to acknowledge that stuff we talk about here today can be very sensitive, especially for survivors, and I do want to note that some of that will be talked about, and also we're going to do a little activity later. You will never be asked to do anything that you do not feel comfortable doing, to share anything that you don't feel comfortable sharing, and that includes our first question. Who here can say "Me Too"? Couple of hands. And who here is familiar with the Me Too movement? Okay, so we're going to give a little bit of history and context about the Me Too movement. Urvashi, could you advance my slide? There we go. Oh, a little distorted, but okay. So the phrase Me Too for a lot of people has only popped up in the last few months. But we want to acknowledge that this work extends decades back, starting with an activist named Tarana Burke, who coined this term in relation to anti-sexual assault work all the way back in 2007. And then October 2017 hits. There's been an expose in the New York Times about the film director Harvey Weinstein being accused by multiple women of sexual assault, sexual harassment, abuse of power, and at the same time, the actress Alyssa Milano asked for survivors to tweet "Me Too" if they have also been a victim of assault or harassment in their workspaces, in their communities, by people in power. And she received millions of responses all over the world. And that shows that this movement and the violence that brought it about in our society really is universal. And as you could see from the previous slide, it started a wave that is still continuing now 6 months later, which is kind of astonishing. You know, sometimes we hear about movements that last a couple months, a couple weeks, fade out, don't really have the longevity and call for the accountability that we've been seeing. You know, very powerful men have been fired from their jobs and are being held accountable for the violence that they perpetrated against their victims. And like I said, this movement really is global. And so maybe Urvashi can give us some context of the Me Too movement within India as well.
So it's been interesting for us in India. Do you mind if I stand up? I lose my energy when I sit down. So is that okay if, if I stand and speak?
I thought you guys might want to stand, but sitting, standing, it's all good.
Yeah, so I have been a facilitator for a very long time, and I find it difficult to, be plonked on a chair and asked to speak. So as you very rightly mentioned, we live in a global world, and all of us are connected. We are the most connected generation ever to have lived on this planet, right? Thanks to the internet revolution, and everything is at our fingertips. So anything that happens in any part of the world actually hits all of us. So India is also not out of the global space. And interestingly, our Me Too arrived a little ahead of time. So we had a gruesome gang rape case in Delhi in 2013. It was very brutal, and what it did for us was a chilling reminder of how unsafe our cities were. And a lot of young people, as well as all of you, actually thronged the streets of various cities across India. And sadly, the girl did not survive the gang rape. But what it led to was a change in our own rape laws. And there were major shifts, there were stringent punishments which were given out. It also changed the conversation that we were having around rape. So before the gang rape case in Delhi happened, and Jyoti was her name, we would not use the word rape so very openly. It was not a dinner table conversation, but the kind of media attention that it brought actually normalized the use of word rape, which is in itself a big move forward, because it was acknowledging the kind of violence which existed in our society for the first time, and that everybody or anybody could talk about it. There was an increase in reporting, which we had not seen earlier for us. And a lot of women, girls came forward, sometimes even boys, came forward to report about sexual harassment or assault to them. And that really brought about the whole shift on norms around rape. What it also did for us was some high-profile cases came forward. There were cases of sexual harassment as well as rape, which are currently ongoing in Indian courts. And some of them, in fact, were in line with whatever the Me Too campaign stood for. And the Me Too campaign then arrived October last year, and that again put the fuel in the fire, and we have many more such cases, conversations happening across our country. What it has also done for us in India is that it has got a lot of regular women, women like us, all of us who are sitting here, into the fold of discussion. It just gave us the space to acknowledge that we, in some point of our own lives, were assaulted in some way or the other, on the streets, in the public transport, in institutions where we studied, or in entertainment, spaces where you go for recreational, it's for some enjoyment that you move out. And there were a lot of men who started asking, why now? So that was something, so suddenly there is a conversation which is happening internationally. Why do you want to now start also blowing your trumpet, saying that, okay, we have also been assaulted? So that really put some of the women's rights organization, completely off. We were irritated because this was actually the first time a lot of regular women who have faced violence and abuse were trying to speak out. And there were these group of people who said that, is this the correct moment for you to speak? Are you taking advantage of the situation which is there? Well, then if not now, then when? Was the question that arose for us. That if we don't speak out now, then when would we speak out ultimately? Because a lot of us did not have the vocabulary, did not have the articulation to even say what we went through. And that's the space that it opened up. It also opened up spaces for trans men and women to speak about harassment, which was earlier not there. And it was good to see that there was movement beyond the binaries, acknowledging that the harassment a person might sexually face, it's not limited just to women. It's everybody or anybody who could be assaulted in a time of space by a person who's in power. In fact, the Aziz Ansari case, I was speaking to Mary in the morning, we had a similar incident in Delhi as well, where a producer, renowned producer, was accused of raping an American student who was assisting, learning from him. And we had similar conversations around, she gave her consent. She was in there with him. How can she say that she was raped? She was there with her own will, her willingness, in a relationship. How can you just withdraw consent like that? We had those similar conversations and similar debates. The only solace which a lot of us have currently is that we have now an entry point into some very tough discussions, which we otherwise won't have had. And this is going to continue, Mary. This is not going to go away because we've just caught it up and we're not going to let it go. This is not going to end here. We need to see some change happening. It's not just a wave, it's not just a tide that will, slowly die out. We want it to move on. So back to Mary.
That's interesting, the question that you said has been brought up in India, Urvashi. Are you just taking advantage of this situation to share your story? Because the true answer is yeah. Like, yeah, we are. That's the power of storytelling. How many people have not felt comfortable sharing their story about something this big or about something small, something personal in your life, until one of your friends or one of your colleagues or somebody in your community has said, yeah, something similar happened to me. And then you realize, oh, it's not just me, I'm not alone. So the answer is, yeah, we kind of are taking advantage of this situation because we have not had this sense of community before this moment. And that's stretching around the world and using social media and really harnessing this energy. We were having a conversation in our office recently about the events in Parkland, Florida with the recent shooting in February and the March for Our Lives that's happening this coming weekend. There's a sense to us that although these movements may not immediately seem related, that we're not sure if the energy that the students in Parkland are receiving from this country right now would have necessarily happened if the Me Too movement hadn't recently happened. You know, people are realizing that the system is broken and patriarchy is dictating so much of how we go about our everyday lives. And that was why we at Breakthrough were inspired to create this campaign that we're calling Act 2. Because the way it started, as many things do, because representation matters, pop culture reflects our lives, it started at the sort of highest echelon of society, with actors and actresses coming forward and saying that they were taken advantage of by people in immense positions of power. Power meaning dictating who got roles and who got jobs. Power meaning money, as it so often does. And so we, as many people within this space, have been asking are, where is the conversation about people within lower paying jobs? People who do not have access to the kind of resources that other people do? What about domestic workers who are so often taken advantage of? What about people in the restaurant industry who work for tips and are harassed by customers and harassed by their bosses and can't really come forward because, again, so much of our life is dictated by money. If we work for tips and a customer says, oh, there's an extra tip in it for you if you do, if you flirt with me, obviously not said explicitly, but implicitly throughout pretty much every day. What happens to those individuals who can't really come forward? And so we wanted to create the Act 2 campaign just to talk about how we can all make change in our daily lives. And like I said earlier, at Breakthrough, we work from a culture change perspective. How can we change this underlying culture of violence that leads to discrimination so that nobody else has to say me too? And we started this campaign because we've heard over the 18 years that we've been working, so many people say, I'm fed up with this. I want to do something, but I'm not an activist. I can't go to those rallies and go to those protests and stand up in front of everybody and march around the city. And we're like, you don't have to. Like, those things are the things that get attention, yes. And a lot of people think that activism equals attention. Whereas to us, activism means changing your own society. You don't have to be out at protests and speaking at rallies. You don't have to be this giant public figure. You start with the basic interactions, changing your own community and your own ecosystem, and changing these narratives that are so ingrained into our society. And so we posed different ways that you can take action in your everyday life. That's why we call it Act 2. Committing to diverse voices. Curate your social media feeds so that you are getting your news from various different sources, people with different identities, people from different countries. Talking about your salary, open at work. How do we correct imbalances of the wage gap if we don't know how much our coworkers are making? Standing up to street harassment, being a bystander, doing bystander intervention. And we launched this in January and offered, I think, about a dozen different ways that can really take small daily actions. And one way that we do that, and kind of like the most basic way that we think about it, is starting with your daily language. Because communication is the most basic form of interaction that we have with each other on a daily basis, whether that's in person, over social media, so many different ways. That's how we interact with each other. And so one question that we have is like, how can we break these narratives and these boxes that we're put into based on our gender or our identity from birth? You know, color coding what boys get and what girls get. And so one question that we have for you is, what do you think of when you hear that phrase? Be a man. What does that mean to you? Anybody can shout something out.
Be strong, be tough.
Be strong, be tough. Anybody else?
No weaknesses.
No weaknesses, yes.
Be appropriate and treat other people fairly, and don't be a bystander.
Don't be a bystander. Anybody else?
Be brave.
Be brave. Go to the next one. These are just some that we came up with. Be a man, you know. There's a level of aggression to it. Don't take no for an answer. You gotta dress in a certain way, enjoy violence, take up space, because that space is yours, you know? That's sort of what is taught to boys from a young age. You're supposed to like to roughhouse. You're supposed to like, you know, violence. We teach girls, oh, he teases you and he pushes you down on the playground because he likes you. Good. And then what do you think of when you hear this? Act like a lady. Yeah.
I think it's sexist.
Sure. Sure. What does that phrase imply?
To me, it's implying, it's
Sure.
like, it's not nice.
Yeah.
Let the other person go first. Be polite.
Yeah, acquiesce to other people. Did I hear something?
Don't be vulgar.
No vulgarity, yeah. Don't swear, don't use curse words, don't talk about sex. No? Heaven forbid. Okay. Other ones we thought of, you know, don't cry in public. Would be seen as weak, as you just said. You should have children. At the bottom, don't use vulgar language. Always apologize. Be sexy, but not too sexy.
What does that mean?
You know, you're supposed to, if you go out to a club and you dress a certain way, there's an implication of what you're looking for when that might not be the case. If you dress in a certain way, you might be dressing for yourself, no? You're supposed to be sexy, but you're not supposed to enjoy sex. That's what that means. And then there are also, you know, we acknowledge that often the conversation begins and ends with those two phrases. Be a man, act like a lady. Because those are the boxes that we're put in from birth. But we also know that violence is perpetrated against cisgendered men and women who don't fit into those boxes. But there's also certain boxes that trans and gender fluid and gender nonconforming people are put into, where if you're, you know, trans woman, you have to pass as a woman, physically. And then part of what leads to violence for these individuals is that we have this binary to begin with. Urvashi, did you have anything to add? No? And so what happens when we're forced into these boxes? What happens when we don't fit into these boxes? We're subject to violence, discrimination, harassment, isolation, bullying. And then what happens? Loss of confidence, fractured sense of self. You know, you force yourself to conform to this box that you don't naturally fit in. You isolate yourself because you know you'll be victim to these things on the left. And all of this leads to mental health issues and perpetrating this for the next generation. And so that's why we do the work we do, is we want to build what we call the breakthrough generation. And it's a generation of people, your age, any age, that can really disrupt this culture that we've built over hundreds of years and create a world where people can express themselves naturally and not conform to fit into these boxes. Pretty much all we have for you today. I know we have a lot more time. I wanted to leave space for questions, discussion, anything y'all want to talk about. I know that there were a lot of people here who weren't necessarily up to date on the Me Too movement, so maybe this is your first time kind of talking about this and learning about this. So if you have any additional questions about that, about how we can push this movement forward, please go ahead and ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking in front of everybody, please come up to us afterwards. Yeah, we just want to thank St. Francis as well.
Well, I'm just wondering if we could kind of go around and, well, maybe give everybody 5 minutes first.
Sure.
And think about if we go back to that slide of these things like talking about your salary.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
just think about some things that, or one thing that you could be able to do that might kind of shift people's thinking about those boxes.
Yeah, and even if it's a one-on-one interaction that you have during the day, that can be a domino effect that makes that person go on to do something similar. So yeah, that's a good idea. What can you think of that you can do in your everyday life that can...
And then we can just go around, people can call out, or we can go around, but I want everybody to try and think of something. And we're gonna have, some of us are gonna have the same answers, and that's great. That shows us that we're onto something. So let's take like 5 minutes and think about it.
Is it possible to create disruption in your spaces? So disruptions are not comfortable, right? Anything that makes us uncomfortable, we don't want to deal with it. And doing something like this is a disruption in your space. So what is your most comfortable space? What are some of the gender stereotypes, roles that you're asked to play in those spaces? And think of a disruption that you might be able to do. Sometimes alone, sometimes you need company and support, right? So you don't have to do it alone all the time. In case you need a friend or a group of friends or support from your teachers, how would you do it?
So also you could talk to your neighbor about this if you're kind of stuck, or just because you like your neighbor, you can talk to them and think about something you guys could do together. I'll come over here and talk to you.
So we'll come back together. Can I start with a volunteer to tell us what you guys talked about?
Yes. So we play on the women's basketball team, and we can like invite people to come to our games and like really just promote like women's sport and like just show how like, because it's overlooked women's sport, and so if I'd like via that channel we can promote women.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think you could do during the event to kind of integrate that?
To get their attention, so it's not just...
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't know. We could have like, we could halftime do something. Well, there's usually like younger girls that come watch our games. So whether it's via them, like inspire, like we usually sign autographs for them after the game, and they like love it. So I don't know, maybe we could do something at halftime to promote that.
I mean, that's a big thing about what we talk about at Breakthrough as well, is that representation is so important. And for younger girls to see that you all are being successful in something that they may not be encouraged to do when they're young, something that's very male-dominated, that in itself is so important.
And another thing you could do is possibly show videos, and Breakthrough definitely has videos about changing gender stereotypes.
Yeah, a couple of years ago we did a campaign called
website.
Be That Guy, where we asked men or male-identifying individuals at sports games to stand up to harassment, as we talk about it here, and there were a couple 2-minute animations, one of which played at Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and one which played at the Indianapolis 500, I believe back in 2014.
But you have also some videos that are like people's personal stories about gender.
Yeah, we have a storytelling platform called the G Word, where we invite people from all around the world to submit their stories about how gender norms have affected their lives. And we get a whole wide range of stories, from stories of surviving assault and incidences of rape, to, as we talked about, being told as a young girl, you're not supposed to be interested in sports. So we have about 700 stories on that platform from all around the world. If you go on our website, which is us.breakthrough.tv, you can find the G Word there as well. And I have business cards with me if anybody wants one after.
And I'm sure there are also ComArt students who would like to work with you guys to make some kind of content, whether it's slideshows, if that's easier than showing video, or, anyway, yeah.
Thank you. Any other volunteers? Let's get one or two more.
So I was talking with Elizabeth, who somehow escaped now that she gave me some great ideas. So I'll just take her ideas and use them. But it was interesting because I was actually thinking along the same lines. So she was saying one thing that we can do is just, as women at least, is just speak up. Don't act like a lady necessarily. Speak up for yourself. And also negotiate. She was bringing this up, and it was so funny because I was having a conversation with people just last night with some faculty members, and we were saying when you got offered your salary, you could negotiate, and all of us were admitting that when we first got our first academic job or something like that, we didn't know. We just thought, and that's apparently very common among women. So I think I'm just gonna negotiate. The next time I get offered anything, I'm going to ask for a little bit more, and all they can say is no. I can do it in a nice way. So I think that's a really practical, easy thing. Is just always going ready to negotiate. That doesn't have to be confrontational or rude, but know your own worth and think that maybe strategically the other person is making you an offer that they can actually afford to up, because a lot of people do negotiate. So, and then also the final thing is talk to other women about it, and other men too, so that people know that when you get offered a job, you don't have to just say, okay, thanks, I'll take that. You could say, okay, you're offering me $15 an hour, could you offer me $16? Could you offer me $17?
I think also interesting what you said, it's not confrontational. And I think a lot of the times we're told you can't be confrontational. And I think that's also something that we kind of want to disrupt as well, is this idea that we're not supposed to be fed up with stuff. We're not supposed to show anger. There was actually a good article by a friend of ours in The Guardian a few weeks back, really advocating to teach young girls to be angry. When somebody touches them, tell them that that's not okay. How many times have we heard stories about girls getting in trouble for, hitting back at a boy who touches her in her class, and then the girl gets in trouble, but the boy doesn't. And that's because, again, goes into what we just said, is that, the girls are supposed to not show anger. And so I'm certainly not advocating for us all to go out and really just be rude to one another. That's certainly not the axiom that we operate from. It's always about compassion, but I think you also need to be compassionate to yourself. Yes, in the back.
And also, in our justification, it's called self-defense. If someone is harming you and technically is threatening you in any way, you have the right to that.
Yeah, self-defense. I think a lot of the time that gets kind of thrown by the wayside, or in favor of keeping the peace. Did I see a hand over here before? I thought that I did. No? Yes.
I want to say I support schooling, and it's reassuring that someone like my sister, my mother, used to go to my accident, society where they don't have to be placed in such an awkward position. And if they are, they have the courage to stand up for themselves. But I do have a question, and I want to ask. But like, say you're in a workplace or in an environment and you see something, or something's brought to your attention, how should it first be addressed? Should you just normally, naturally, going to comfort the victim of the attacker? Should you just shut them immediately, or should you wait to find the full story? Like, as you expressed in the Sar's situation, where maybe he wasn't as guilty as he seemed.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that question. And just to repeat, the question was, if we see someone being harassed in a workplace, what's the first step that we take? And I think you're right in saying it always starts with the person being harassed, because sometimes also we have to allow them the agency of leading whatever comes next. Some people don't want to report this, and that's their prerogative. We really want there to be accountability, but we have to let the people at the center lead their own advocacy. And I think a lot of the time, no, it's not always a black and white situation. It's not always, this person did this, now we need to shun them from their career. And the Aziz Ansari situation, for those, is everybody familiar with that case? Yes, no? Okay, so just to fill you in, the actor Aziz Ansari, a couple months after the Harvey Weinstein case went public, was accused by a woman who went home with him at night. She said, "I do not want to have sex," and he kind of pushed things a little further, even though she said no a couple times, and then she admits, I kind of just let things happen. And so the questions that come up from an article like this is, and what we've heard a lot in our work is, well, he didn't actually assault her. And yes, that is technically true, but there are, like Urvashi was saying earlier, there are lines of consent that don't need to be crossed. Like if you're in a situation where the person you're with, if you can't really read the room, then I think that's also an educational opportunity for yourself as well. Urvashi, did you have more to say?
So, I'll take that, and it's challenging to even be in that space. To be able to decide for somebody else, it's tough. You cannot really figure out whether that person needs help or not, right? And where do you cross the line? But sometimes it just happens so that if you let another person know that you are watchful, you're aware of what's happened, and in case need be, you can help out, that is also good. At least you can go and ask, are you okay? Are you doing fine? Is there something that you need help with? Even not entering a space where you confront the person who's the perpetrator, not then and there. But even that said and done is good enough. Sometimes you have friends who've been trolled online, coming in sharing with you that they've been trolled. At least give them a listening ear. Listen to them that they might have, faced abuse and they are unsure what to. Maybe you also do not have all the answers. But then even giving a listening ear does help. Try and look for resources where you can that can be shared with the person, not very intentionally, but by the way, this is somewhere or some places you could go for help. We always keep that ready in our purses. So in India, some of us actually carry helpline numbers, and in a couple of times I've seen in buses where girls are in very uncomfortable situations traveling. We try and see that if they need help, we just give them a number saying that in case you want, you can reach out to this number. So there are different ways of doing it subtly, but in case the problem is really grave, I think we need to stand up if you feel that the person is not able to speak for themselves. So intervene where there is need, but do it collectively. Don't harm yourself. Don't put yourself at risk at any point in time. Ensure that you're in a group, somewhere safe. You can reach out to somebody else. You can call the police. There are other ways of doing it, and that's the best thing to do in a situation like that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just chime in on that too? Because I think so many situations that you're in, like if you're at this college or if you're in a workplace, and sometimes this can be complicated. But I think, there's been so much time of people kind of seeing something happening and sitting back. So I think now we should just sort of lean the other direction. I don't want any witch hunts going on. I don't think really this moment has been about witch hunts, even though that's the accusation.
Yeah.
But so learn in your, in the college you can go to the dean of students, you could go to the counseling center. There are all kinds of places that you could go. You can talk to a professor, although we are mandated to have to report if it's something about a sexual assault. But at any rate, find out what the channels are that you can go to, if it's at a job, is there an HR department? Can you go to them and say, I saw this, it looked funny to me. Is there any way to do an investigation or that you can look into this? So at least going that far and looking at what channels there are, and if there aren't channels available, it's also an opportunity to say, let's make a channel where let's make somebody our ombudsman or ombudswoman that can kind of get the ball rolling on something like this if something's happening. But
I wanted to add to, directly to the point you raised about whether one should intervene in something simple like sexist jokes in the workplace or in social situations. I think, and the cop-out line is always, you have no sense of humor, so the person is very reluctant to protest something, and you sort of want to run with the guys and you really want to laugh at all, don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. But I think a person can at that point say, no, I don't think it's funny. I really don't think it's funny. I mean, that is the kind of intervention that can be done. And the other thing is about, this whole thing about committing to diverse voices or to listen to other perspectives, because something that you've been seeing for generations and in your life and all around you seems normal. So it doesn't seem that's how we have stereotypes about gender and other, because it seems normal that this is what girls do, this is what guys do. So there has to be education about what does consent mean. I mean, it's not normal. It's not that somebody's just playing hard to get or just protesting, but actually no means yes and those kind of things. So one has to start questioning and not sleepwalk through life. I think that's a very important thing. And don't think, this is the way things are done, because your generation really doesn't need to do that. I mean, like you pointed out, you're the most connected generation. You have so many resources available to you, and there's really no need to, fall into that trap.
In fact, I would like to add to what you just mentioned. The other thing very common, and I'm not sure how much of it happens here in the US, but in India, we have people walking on the street, talking to each other, especially generally men, who use a lot of abusive language, and those abusive language has a lot of cuss words against women and girls, sisters and mothers. And that's how it, the conversation just starts and ends, and in one conversation there might be 10 times the words have been used. Is there a way to stop that? Because it's very irritating. You on an escalator, and then there are two guys in front of you who are at the back, who loudly, abusing each other. In fact, their mothers and sisters in a regular conversation. And why is that need? Why does that even have to happen? Don't you even realize that in that regular conversation, you're actually abusing your own women, the women who related to you in some way or the other? It's so simple. Just get over it. But and sometimes, it has so happened that if I have a colleague or somebody else traveling with me, I also speak loudly, saying that these men have no sense where they are. And they're using such bad words. It is abuse to my ears, my senses, my soul. I want to tear them apart then and there. But I can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's a paradox that the sense of honor, the honor the idea of honor is so strong in those cultures. Not that it's non-existent here. Over here also, you can't hit upon anybody's woman, anybody's girlfriend. So on one hand, you have this idea. On the other hand, everybody takes it in a joke, you know? So that contradiction needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. I also just want to say, we talk about this movement as being a tide and a wave. And I just want to clarify, the tide is not for men to be fired. That is not the end goal of this movement. The end goal is for survivors to be believed. That's the wave that we're looking for, is for people to be believed and people feel comfortable coming forward with their stories and to have some level of accountability. And that's not always somebody being fired and never working again. I think it's easy to fall prey to hyperbole in something like this. Was there another hand thing?
Is anybody else who would want to share?
I just agree, you know, I have my class here, young men here who are very smart, who are very ambitious. And somehow when you start talking about these issues, women's issues, I have noticed that at times people feel uncomfortable. It's like it's a conspiracy against them. And I try to kind of address that thing right there. And it's not a conspiracy. You're our sons, our brothers. We are not conspiring to, you know, bring you down and destroy you. We just want you to start thinking a little differently. And if anybody is doing it in your circle, talking this way, behaving this way, it's okay. You know, if somebody else's sister is treated in a bad manner, it's not okay if your sister is treated that manner, you know. You want to give respect to every form of life.
And there have been multiple studies that have shown that gender diversity impacts everyone positively, especially in the workplace. Gender diverse workplaces are more likely to have better employee benefits, more paid sick leave, more family leave, both for mothers and fathers, a better work-life balance. So that's just one example where diversity really helps everyone.
I'd like to contribute to what you just mentioned. So it's tough to get it's tough to engage men in these conversations. It's been tough because they, for a very long time, have been thinking that it's women's problem. And in India, we use a very common phrase which says women are women's worst enemies. And I'm sure you might have also heard it here. So they are pitted against each other. And currently, the wave has, or the tide has shifted, where women are trying to be women's best allies. So suddenly there is a kind of feeling that, this tide should not turn against us. So it's really not the us versus them. It's a conversation that we want to have where women want to be free of violence. It's a right. We are, as human beings, want to live without the fear of being hit, abused in our own families, in our communities, in the spaces that we occupy. It's simple and there is nothing beyond it. So if we don't have conversations with you or with other women, how are we going to move forward? If there is no dialogue, and if you shut off the dialogue, then what's the point? Which is why the Me Too is becoming such a big conversation leader, because it has opened up that space for women to come forward and share their stories. Just listen to them, because these stories are very real. And a lot of women and girls have taken the courage to come and even share it, because they will never find the courage again if you shut them up. Yeah, there was one more hand, and we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, thank you for taking the time out of your, busy schedule to come talk to us and have a nice dialogue with us. And I think that a good method that we could use is the way, like, when we're in middle school, elementary school, we have a lot of assemblies about how we can't do drugs, about violence, but I never remember once of them like mentioning women and how they're treated.
Neither do I.
Yeah, because I've been going from pre-K to college. This is my first time having an assembly to talk about this, because many people. So if you start introducing children to this at an early age, it'll be easier for them to adapt and they could learn quicker. Because I feel like right now it's kind of late for you guys to be. Well, it's not your fault, but it's kind of late for someone of my age to be learning about this and to be learning about all of about this movement. But it's better late than never. But if the earlier we could get people involved and started, and for them to know about this, the better it could be for us.
What's your major?
I'm a criminal justice major, so we've been watching documentaries about this in class about how people have been raped at college campuses, and the colleges they just don't want to have a bad reputation to their name, so they completely disregard it, or they don't have anyone to sympathize with these people or to talk to them and get them help. Many of the colleges actually been going out of their way so that these stories don't go public. They've been working against them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, and I think that is an excellent idea. I completely agree that, we have kind of a fear of talking to children about stuff like this. We kind of want to, and it comes from a good place. We want to keep our children in a bubble a little bit, don't want to expose them to some often very harsh realities. But as we said earlier, it starts with kids. Pink for girls, blue for boys. And if we're not having those conversations with them from an early age, you're right. It does get to a point where, it's hard to learn anything at an older age. It's hard to reprogram our brains and learn what different things mean. So, absolutely. And I think that could be a good project for our class and teachers. Anybody else? Yes, go
No,
ahead.
I just wanted to ask all of you guys, Dr. Palmer is also here, our guest, Dr. Martha, sociologist. I just want to know, because we've seen so many movements in our lives. Where is this movement going to go? What would be the future? Will we make any meaningful changes? Will we be able to make any meaningful changes? This society, and when this society takes lead, the others also here. So, yeah, sometimes forcibly, but you can bring change in other societies also. You at least make them think about it. So, I just want to know, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we say that we work from a culture change perspective, and it can be very frustrating to do work like this because to see actual measurable change is so hard. It takes generations. I mean, we saw how long the civil rights movement lasted, and yet we're still not at a place where there is equality. The Black Lives Matter movement is only in the past 5 years, and it's fighting for things that the civil rights movement was fighting for 50 years ago. So it's tough to say, this is where we want to end up. This is the baseline of what we'll accept. And I don't necessarily think that that's how we operate. Urvashi, do you have?
So I feel everything is like a drop in the ocean, and it will contribute to, making the ultimate change that we want to look forward. So if I am here today as an Indian woman, I'm sure there are lots who must have struggled years before me, centuries before me, so that I can be here and be in a privileged position speaking to all of you in a language which is foreign for me. So obviously my education is there, my job is there, I'm able to take on a career path that I want to, and be in a space where I can talk to people like you. So there are people who fought for a lot of women who have a privileged position today, and hopefully all of us in some way or the other contribute to creating a change that we want to see for the future. We might not live to see that, really. It might be really beyond our own lives. But I think we will reach there. There will be a position where, you know, whatever. So the UN has a special, interesting statistics that they keep throwing up that to get gender equality, we still need around 120 more years of work. 120 years? Okay, that's a lot of work. And since I've been to the CSW, the statistics have been like thrown around a lot, right? So that's that really sends a chill down my bone because I really don't want the next generation to fight in the same fashion that I am doing or my mother has done or my grandmother has done, you know. So it has to evolve, and it evolves with the next generation to whom we are talking to. And you're absolutely right, bang on. It's the next generation. It's the generation which is currently here, which is you guys, and it's the generation that we're next creating that will lead the change. Don't expect much from your politicians.
I just want to say too, just an example from my life that I always like to uplift is, I grew up in the Midwest in a very small town, and my father never voted, never was politically engaged, never was civically engaged, never really talked about social issues. And in the past 5 years that I've talked about this more and studied this and worked in this, my father voted in the 2012 election and the 2016 election. And the last time I was home, we had like a 2-hour-long conversation about all of these issues. And that's what we mean by like daily interactions. Just changing one person to get them a little bit more aware, even. Awareness seems empty, but it does so much. Is there anybody else that wanted to talk about what they talked about in their small groups? Urvashi, do we have time to show your video? 15 minutes?
Yeah, it's a short video. So what I'm going to do is, I find it very restricting. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you a short video. This is from India, the work that we do. It's on the issue of son preference. And it's a very personal story of a person who's taken a small initiative, a small step to change the way people think. And what you're going to see is from a state called Haryana, where the child sex ratio is the lowest in our country. So the actual ratio generally, which is a decent one, is 950 to 950 girls for 1,000 boys. Is supposed to be decent enough. This state has around 830 girls for 1,000 boys. And this actually shift in the child sex ratio takes decades of elimination of the girl child or a girl fetus. And the primary reason for not wanting girls is that this state has a lot of land. So it has a lot of landed people who have a lot of money. And if they don't have a son, then who does the property go to? They cannot give the property away to their daughters. And if daughters are born, they have to give away huge sum of dowry in marriage, basically, which is a groom price, right? And that's something which the fathers or the families do not want. Number two, the sons are the bearers of, so to say, all the rituals which are related to death, and which is why it's important to have a son, because only after the son does your final rituals will you go to heaven, right? So all these norms are there, and which is why girls are not wanted in this state. This state imports girls or women from other states for getting their boys married. They don't have girls in their communities. There are certain communities where there are no girls at all. You will not find any young girls. They import women from outside to get married, to get their boys married, and the situation is so critical that the government had to start, programs to increase the number of girls who were born and celebrate. So one ceremony of a boy child being born is taking a steel plate and a steel spoon and banging it. It's a kind of a celebration to basically announce to the villagers that you have a son in your family. So the film shows that, and we'll see how it goes.
I think I had given an assignment to my class, an observation assignment, and I told you to go to an unfamiliar place because things that you are very used to seem so normal and you stop noticing what is happening. Something similar is being said over here, that if we take for granted what is happening to be the normal, then we are not going to see any change. We have to question this, and that's why, as you're the most connected generation, you are getting information and inputs from all across the world. You have news at your fingertips, and that should allow you to ask questions of your environment. That should ask you, allow you to say, is this the way things should be? Shouldn't there be a change? And of course, we need to be as brave as both speakers have pointed out, to realize that the change you're striving for may not happen in your lifetime, but you definitely are contributing to it in a very big way.
We also totally acknowledge that this session is only 2 to 6, so if we all do have to leave, no hard feelings here.
Okay. Thank you so much to Breakthrough. Let's give them a big